Oh, hello there, wherever you're listening, however you're listening on the Reality After Show on YouTube or joining us live on Twitter at Gabe Ortiz. Thank you so much for tuning in, even just a little bit of your evening with us here on Gabe's Big Move. At Gabe Ortiz is where you can join me on Twitter if you're not over there, or of course on the Reality After Show. Leave your comments in the comments section, your questions, your roast, your praise, whatever it may be. Go ahead and drop something in there. Always love to try to leave some time at the end of the show for a little bit of Q&A. So if you have any questions that have to do with tonight's topic, that have to do with Survivor in general, that have to do with me personally, whatever it may be, Survivor 50, Survivor 47, the Baltimore Ravens, the Orioles, whatever you want to talk about at the end of the show, go ahead and drop it in the comment section. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end to go ahead and tackle some of those questions, concerns, comments, whatever they may be. So as people are kind of filling in here before we kind of get into what I want to talk about tonight, the folks from Survivor 50 get home today. How exciting is that, right? Everybody from Survivor 50, I assume at this point, has landed back in LAX and are all on their way back home to whatever part of the continent they currently live in. So, just send some good energy out to all those folks. Hopefully, the experience was a positive one for them. Hopefully, our girl Genevieve went out there and burned the whole island down, or at least one trying. We'll have to wait and see. A few months until we get there. A long, long wait. A long, long wait until we get uh to season 50. But boy, oh boy, I cannot wait to see what it has in store for all of us. I can't wait to see Genevieve again, to be honest with you. That's something that I am so excited for, is to, have her back in the group chats, have her back on the trips that we take as a cast for 47. It's gonna be a really fun time getting FaceTimes from her, getting to call her, getting to hear her jokes. It's gonna be really, really cool to have Genevieve back in the fold. I know it was only, 5 weeks, 6 weeks that she was gone, but it certainly felt like a lot longer than that for all of us on season 47. So we're all very, very, very excited to have Genevieve back, regardless of how she did. I know that we are all bursting with pride for Genevieve to go out there and be the lone representative of the best new era season of Survivor. So let's get into a little bit of what I want to talk about tonight. And if you're joining us either on Twitter or on the Reality After Show YouTube channel, you can see the question of the evening is, what's better as a Survivor player? To go and win the game or to win the story? And for some of the best players of all time, they didn't have to choose one or the other. They won the game and they won the story. But there are plenty of examples, maybe even more examples, of folks who go out and they win the game, but they don't win the story. And obviously vice versa. So first, let's break down what that question really means, right? There are so many players throughout the history of Survivor that leave their season as the bona fide fan favorite, that leave their season with a huge cult following of Survivor fans, that leave their season, and a lot of folks are saying, I wish that they won. And I have often been asking myself, even before I went and played Survivor, of, is that better than actually winning the game? Especially in today's day and age, where I think the thing that most people would jump to right away is like the one that gives you $1 million is the better one. And that's a really, really strong argument. I don't want to discount that argument. Like, yeah, being a normal person and getting $1 million dropped into your lap is probably always the best possible outcome, right? But there are so many revenue streams that exist just as individuals, that you can access rather as an individual, that I wonder if you can make that up on the back end. Maybe not the full million, but enough money to really change the way you live your everyday life, as if you got $1 million check. And maybe I'm being a bit overzealous about, how much money you can make on social media if you are truly the bona fide out and out fan favorite of a Survivor season that doesn't go on to win. But I think there's a lot of merit to being the champion of the story for the season. And there's a lot that goes into this, right? There's obviously the person themselves. But on top of that, so much of what goes into who wins the story is out of the control of the players, because the players aren't the ones telling the story. And this is something that for the biggest fans of the show will not come as a shock, but you have to keep in mind that the story is being told by the producers, by the editors, to a certain degree, by Jeff Probst. And with that being the case, I think we have to ask the question, is the person who wins the story even really the person who had the most compelling story, or is it the person that the producers and the editors decided had the best story? Because I'll tell you right now, there is hundreds of hours of content for any given Survivor season. More than enough that can be chopped up and Frankenstein together to make anybody look like anything. And that is something that I really wish the community would have a more constant reminder of, or just a more consistent sense of, because people get really, really harsh backlash after going out on Survivor. And there are times when it's deserved, don't get me wrong. But there's also a lot of times where it's just this Frankenstein edit of this person's time on the island that got presented in a specific way that warranted that backlash. I mean, I can tell you just from 47, when I was watching the episodes, like the amount of times that I heard sentences, not just like scenes and confessionals edited, but sentences edited to say something completely different. If you know if you know these people personally, the folks you play with, you know their cadence, you know what their voice sounds like, you know how they talk. When you hear someone go, "I really wanted to go get Joe out today." And, to the untrained ear, it happens so quickly, and you don't really have that person's voice and cadence locked into your brain pattern that, like, it sounds normal. But when you do have that experience with that person and you do know what they actually said, it's it kind of trips you out a little bit to hear how they can chop up individual sentences and words to form a completely new one. So, when we talk about who wins the story, is it really who wins the story of whatever season they're on, or who won the lottery of the producers deciding that they were going to tell a very compelling story for this person? And I think that is a season by season kind of conversation, right? I don't think that anything happened on 47 that was not generally honest. Now, yeah, there were sentences that were chopped up. There were confessionals that were chopped up. There were things that happened that were not shown in an honest order during the edit, but there were no overarching stories. There were no personalities that were portrayed in a way that I thought was dishonest. Generally speaking, blanket statement. Were there individual scenes and confessionals and events that, weren't really how it happened? Sure, absolutely. But generally speaking, I think everybody who was in power positions over the course of the season were actually in power positions in the island. People who were really appreciated on the island, right? Who got along with a lot of people. I think generally that was shown. I think people who did not get along with a lot of people who were more vilified by the community of players on Fiji were shown that way in the edit. For me personally, I thought that I got along way better with everybody than what was shown. But I'm okay with that. They gave me a more villainous edit, and I had a lot of fun with that. I'll always regurgitate that sentiment because it is true. But there are other seasons where it goes really wacky. And like 48, I think, is a great example of that. Where it's like it wasn't until the final 2 episodes of the season that we really started to understand what was actually going on the island. And the people who are truly the best Survivor players, and I think that this is very difficult to do, until you go out for your second, your third, your fourth time to be able to manipulate the narrative and manipulate the producers and the editing in a way that will show you in a certain light that you want to go out into the world, whether it's like a babyface hero, whether it's a treacherous villain, whether it's, somebody who's really fighting for something back at home, whether it's whatever it may be. Like, that's a very difficult thing to do when you are out there your first time. And I think you have to have a certain kind of relationship with the producers and understand how they do their jobs, and be able to more quickly cope with all the stressors that exist with playing Survivor, the hunger, the heat, the homesick, the being in the jungle, the lying, the deceit, right? Like, if you wanna go out there and you wanna build a character, and this is like, again, I hate giving him props for anything, to be totally honest, because it's his channel and, I don't wanna seem like I'm being a company man or kissing ass or whatever, but it is something that Johnny Fairplay was very good at. He went out there for his first time on Pearl Islands and built this character of Johnny Fairplay. And, like, that is a very difficult thing to do, to build up this character in the way that he did it when the genre and the medium of reality TV was such a blank slate, and Survivor was such this kind of run and gun type production. To be able to build up this character while being away from home, while starving, while dealing with intense environmental effects like heat and the jungle and bug bites and all, and no sleep and all these things. And there are other people after Fairplay who have come along and done that and have done it very well. But I think you would be hard pressed to find people who manage to do that their first time out. And you look at somebody like Boston Rob. I don't think he truly became like Boston Rob the Godfather until he went and won on Redemption Island. Now we kind of had like, the whole Italian guy thing going on, even all the way back on Marquesas and All Stars. And All Stars, he had, this more cutthroat, ruthless act about him, but he didn't truly become the Godfather until Redemption Island, till he established the buddy system, till he was actually running the island with impunity. And I think a lot of that is because he was used to a lot of what comes with playing Survivor. So he didn't have to cope with any of that. He was also playing with people who were not used to that, who were doing it for the first time. He had a relationship with all the producers and the editors and even Jeff. And those things really swing the pendulum in terms of how your story is going to get told. And so getting back to the question at hand here, what is better to happen, to win the game or to win the story? Now, this is under the assumption that whatever hypothetical we're forming, the winner does not win the story. The winner of the story does not win the game. And I think it comes down to what is truly important to you, right? What 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 is it that makes you want to go out there? Do you want to be a Johnny Fairplay type where you're like, I want to build myself up as this character? I want to be able to take this character into other spaces, whether it's other shows, whether it's internet content, whatever it may be. Or are you somebody who's like, I want to be sole survivor more than anything? And that's all that matters. And I think we see people very often in the new era who win the story but don't win the game. 43, great example of that. I mean, it's hard to say anybody but Jesse won the story in 43, right? I think everybody would agree with that he was the bona fide face of that season, the star of that season, the fallen angel, somebody who a lot of people will say should have won that season. And Gabler ends up winning the $1 million, is the sole survivor of season 43. But no one's really talking about Gabler a whole lot since 43's ended. No one really thinks of him as this pillar of Survivor lore, new era Survivor lore. And actually, I'm a Gabler truthler, right? I'm into Gabler. I think he was a fine winner. Not the best winner, but I don't think he's as bad of a winner as many people like to say. And I enjoyed watching him on 43. So it's like, who would you rather be coming out of Survivor 43? Would you rather be Gabler or would you rather be Jesse? And I honestly think, in the comments, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of people would actually rather be Jesse than be Gabler. Just looking at the way that, all the fans out there talk about those two. Like, would you rather be talked about after the show's over the way that people talk about Jesse? Or would you rather be talked about by people the way folks talk about Gabler? And like, there's no right or wrong answer to that question. Let me be clear. There's no right or wrong answer to that question. There's only your answer. But I would be pretty shocked if more people would say, like, yeah, I'd rather be Gabler coming out of season 43. Season 44, I think, is also an interesting one because I think it's fair to say that Carolyn won the story of season 44. She's the face of that season. She got by far the biggest, loudest edit of anybody on 44. And yet Jam Jam won the game. And I think what Jam Jam has done is he has managed to be, and this is where maybe winning the game but not winning the story could be better, is I think Jam Jam has leveraged his victory in a very powerful way. In that, like, he's somebody that NBC wants to be on Traders, much like Carolyn. And he's somebody that has developed this following. And I think while maybe the season has not aged very well, his win has aged very well with time. And despite having a quote unquote worse edit, I don't even want to say worse edit, but having a lighter edit than Carolyn did, I think that they are kind of on equal footing in their standing within the community. If you look at a 47's tough because there's a lot of great stories in 47. And I think I might be too biased to give, a particularly objective opinion on the season itself. But if you look at like an All-Stars, Boston Rob clearly won the story of that season despite losing the game. And yeah, you can say that Amber's win is also kind of his win, the marriage and all of that. But Boston Rob was able to take that story victory and turn it into a reality TV empire of a brand that Boston Rob is today, doing countless shows, cover of magazines, all this and that. And so that's an instance where, I think winning the story was probably better than winning the season. And does Boston Rob get called back as many times as he does if he wins All Stars? I think that is a fascinating discussion because let's be honest, part of why Boston Rob keeps getting called back, yes, of course, he's Boston Rob and he's his great character, but also we all wanted to see him win, right? Like everybody was waiting to see Boston Rob go out and get his win. When was that going to happen? And I think maybe that is why he got called back a third, a fourth, a fifth time. And I'm not so sure that production and Jeff are as eager, as antsy to get him back on the show if he goes out and wins on All Stars. And I think there's a lot of merit to the idea that him coming in second that season while still being the most dominating personality was actually a good thing for him in the long run. And so again, I don't know if there's a particularly right answer to this question because if you go out to Survivor and you're like, look, I just want to win $1 million, that's it. Then, like, yeah, obviously you want to be the winner. You want to be Gabler over Jesse. But if you go out there and your goal is to have a legacy in the game, your goal is to be somebody that folks want to see again, your goal is to be somebody that is talked about with reverence within the community. I think winning the story is a better option for you than winning the game. And doing both is very difficult. Not impossible. It happens plenty of times. But doing both is very difficult. Tocantins, Coach obviously wins the story in Tocantins. And no disrespect to JT, who had a fantastic run on that season, deserved winner, awesome personality, all the above. And also obviously built quite a legacy for himself in the game. But I wonder if Coach is the Dragon Slayer without a bit of tragedy in his first run out. Does Coach have the legacy that he has if he doesn't have some pain and some tragedy and some downfall to work through on his first run out? And I'm not totally sure if he is. I don't think that he is the character that is so beloved and revered today within the Survivor community if he goes out and wins on his first run. I think his downfall added so much complexity and intrigue to who the Dragon Slayer is. And again, made production, made fans, made Jeff so antsy to get him back on the show. The allure of having these big personalities win is such a powerful pull, is such a strong tool to have. And I give immense credit to those people for being able to keep coming back and keep building that legacy and keep building that story. You know, Coach coming back on South Pacific, and he got to evolve into this character that actually looked like he could go and win the game, and he has a pretty weak final tribal council and ends up losing, but still clearly won the story of South Pacific. Coach is Christian Cole on a overall wacky season, regardless of Coach. And like I think that again, all of these seasons like add to the legacy, add to the intrigue, add to the mystery, add to the lore of Coach Wade. And like it is having all of that stacked up because unless we learn something about season 50, like Coach doesn't have any wins. And yet I think a lot of people would rather be a Coach Wade than a Natalie White, would rather be a Coach Wade than a Gabler, would rather be a Coach Wade than a Fabio, would rather be a Coach Wade than so many of the winners, probably most of the winners, the vast majority of the winners. And I think like a lot of people would agree with that in their heart of hearts. Like, yeah, having $1 million is nice, but what would you rather have? $1 million as a Survivor fan, $1 million, or the legacy of Coach Wade? Would you rather have $1 million or the legacy of a Sari Fields? And like, if you come out and you say, I'd rather have the $1 million, hey, I get that. I won't sit here and argue with you. And I'm more than anything trying to make a read on the community as a whole. And I think most of the community would say, I'd rather have that legacy. I'd rather be a known active pillar of this show and this community. And so it goes back to this question, what's better, to win the game or to win the story? And I want to circle back to something that I was kind of hinting at that I want to get a little bit deeper in is who's telling the story. And so obviously the way the main storytelling device over the course of any season of Survivor is the confessionals. And these confessionals are handpicked and hand edited by a big team of producers that work for CBS and that work for Survivor. They are the ones who get to decide who speaks the most on the season. They are the ones who gets to decide who has a deep and complex story and who has a straightforward and simple story. So it begs the question of, can you as a player really control your narrative if it's the producers that are editing your voice, that are presenting your voice to the masses? And I think it's very difficult to do that, to control your narrative, unless you go all in on one thing, right? Like, I hate to keep using him as an example, but like for our season, Rome went all in on one thing. I want to be this chaotic villain that does every puzzle, that does every challenge, that goes on every journey. And that was the edit that he ended up getting. So mission accomplished, but it was very simple and it was very straightforward. And the best stories and players who truly win the story are players that get complex, relatable, personal stories thrown in there. So, like for me, for instance, I thought, and again, this is not me whining or complaining. I'm more than at peace with this, and again, had tons of fun with it. But like my story, I think, was told in a rather simple and straightforward way when there was more complexity there. If I go deeper in the game, if I win the game, whatever it may be, like I think that complexity gets shown. And this is something I've talked about a lot on this show and on other shows. But like, yeah, in my confessionals, I was extremely snarky. I was extremely antagonistic in my confessionals. But around camp, like I got along great with everybody. I loved everybody. And I got a lot of that love back. And I'm very, very, very lucky to still have those kinds of relationships with a lot of the people that I played with. Um, but that's an instance where like my voice was being controlled by the editors. My relationships as they were portrayed on the show were being controlled by the editors. And that's fine. That's what you sign up for. That's part of the show. Like it is a TV show. I'm not going to hop in the edit room and start, editing and moving around my scenes and my confessionals and whatever software program they use. Like, of course not. It's ridiculous. But it is an example of like, you may win the story, and I'm not claiming I won the story on 47, but you may win the story on the island in real time. But the editors and producers may decide to go in a different direction for what they want the world to see. And that is something that I think is, you know, fascinating to think about, but also gives so much context and so much perspective to how different what happens on the island is to what we see on the show. So, like Genevieve, for instance, who just got home from Fiji or is going to get home at some point today. Like, I still have people come up to me, and when they ask me, they're like, Genevieve was kind of nasty, huh? Like, she was kind of mean. She's got a nasty attitude, huh? And it's always so befuddling to me because Genevieve may be the single sweetest, kindest, softest person on our entire season. And she had a very deep and complex story told, but I think that more of her story was kind of a nasty, cold, calculated, emotionless type of person. When in reality, like that couldn't be less true. And even on the island, where she was more like that than she is in real life, for sure, on the island. But even on the island, like, Genevieve made everybody laugh. Genevieve was a very warm person to be around most of the time. She would click into Terminator mode every once in a while, and you would kind of see those walls go up. But, like, for people to come away from watching Genevieve's season, and I get why they do because of how it was edited, but to say, like, "Man, she was kinda nasty, huh?" That's always so crazy to me because of, how, I have a very close personal relationship with her in real life, and, like, she is so sweet and so nice and so warm and so, like, not afraid, but so averse to, like, hurting people's feelings. Because she wants everybody to get along, because she wants to get along with everybody. And there was more than enough time of her in Fiji to make her that kind of character out there. And the producers and editors decided, which is their right, we think it'll be a more compelling story if we make her more villainous and cold and calculated and ruthless. And that's exactly what they did. And like that was Genevieve's story of season 47. And it totally, within the realm of possibility and capability, could have been the complete opposite. And the editors just decided to go a different way. So, kind of what I'm getting at here is like how much of winning the story is you properly winning the story, and how much of it is it just you getting lucky enough that the producers decided your story was going to be the one that won. And I think this kind of floats back to, is it better to win the game? Because that's undeniable. Nobody on your season, nobody in the fan base, whatever it may be, can take that away from you. Nobody can say, like, oh, well, that's just how you got edited. Yeah, you were this fallen angel type. You were a great player. You were this huge, big, loud, attractive personality. But that's just how you got edited. If you win, it's like, look, I got the votes and I got the money in my bank account. You can't take that away from me. And I think that's a very fair argument for why perhaps winning the story, or excuse me, winning the game might be better, because no one can take that away from you ever. Question coming in here from Quinn Uter. Who do you think won the story on your season? Yeah, I think that's a good question because I think there were so many great stories on season 47. Like, if you look at a 48, it's like, okay, Joe and Eva won the story, right? There's zero doubt about that. By far, the loudest voices and personalities on the island. By far, the most talked about people over the course of the season. By far, the most heavily edited characters of the season. Like, there's not really any debate there. And if Kyle doesn't go on and win, I don't think his story holds a candle to what Joe and Eva had in terms of the narrative. But for our season, it's like, I think there's a lot of different candidates. I think Genevieve is a great candidate. I think that her evolution over the course of the season is so fascinating. To go from this person that came into the game and was like, I'm going to be cold, I'm going to be calculated, no friends, no personal relationships, only winning, blindsides Keyshawn, really hurts Teeny through that blindside, blindsides Saul, hurts Teeny again through that blindside, and has to have this moment of like, oh my God, this is hurting me now. Seeing Teeny come to me angry, upset, crying. This is hurting me and my soul. And I'm going against what I said I was going to do when I came out here, which was put these personal barriers up. And then having to revert back to her original state of like, if I'm going to finish this game out, I got to go back to how I came in. And just like that roller coaster of like cold and calculated to really, personal and emotional, back to cold and calculated. And then obviously going out like that's evolution. That's a story right there. Andy, I think, is the other name that a lot of people would say won the story of 47. Complete and total physical and mental breakdown and emotional breakdown in the very first immunity challenge. On the absolute bottom of his tribe, manages to get out of Gata alive and evolve into this strategic flipping mastermind of our season. I don't mean flipping as a replacement for a different word. I mean literally flipping back and forth between alliances, acting as a pendulum to go back and forth between plans and alliances and vote outs to really push not just the strategy and the votes of the season forward, but to push the narrative of the season forward. To get to that point and starting where he started, like that's evolution. That's a season right there. Rachel starting out pretty at the bottom of her tribe. She's in on the John vote, but then Annika goes home. And all of a sudden, like, she's, oh my God, I'm on the bottom. I was left out of this Annika vote. The other three were in on it. The other three planned it. I got to figure out what I'm going to do now. Gets blindsided for the Sierra vote. Oh my God, we're at the merge now. We made it to the jury phase of the game, and I'm still getting blindsided. I still don't have much of a foothold in this game. I'm wondering if I need to play my idol tonight because I got no idea what's going on. To then getting to the point where her threat level has gotten so big that her only way to get to the end is to just keep being immune, to keep removing herself as an option to be voted for, physically, literally. And she does that. Like that's evolution. That's a story right there. Sam, to go from somebody who was running his pre-merge tribe, clearly at the top, clearly the brains of the operation on his pre-merge tribe, to having the Sierra blindside go down, losing his number one ally, being left out of that and being like, oh my God, not only am I this huge threat physically, strategically, and socially, but I'm also on the bottom, right? Like Sam was a threat that had to play from the bottom, which is a very unique kind of player that we can save for another time. To then find his way back into the game and be part of this huge Operation Italy move and make it into Final Tribal Council and to go and win Fire in the most dramatic comeback that we've seen in Survivor history for a fire making challenge. Like that's a story. That's evolution. And so I think you can kind of take your pick of the litter for who you think won the story of season 47. I would not argue too hard on any of those options. I think if I had to pick one, I might say Andy won the story of 47. But again, if you give me a couple minutes, I could talk myself into any of the other people that I just named. And that is what makes Survivor 47 such a great season, is that it's all these great stories that are all running parallel to each other and often intersecting. And so it's like, would you rather be a Rachel or would you rather be an Andy or a Genevieve? Again, I don't think there's any wrong answer to that question. There's only your answer to that question. And I don't think Rachel's a great example because I think she has quite a legacy and is talked about very well and in high regard within the community. And I honestly think the best example of this. And I mean, I'll tell you what, in the chat, throw out some good examples like my Gabler and Jesse example of like, would you rather be a winner that's not very talked about and not held in very high regard? Or would you rather be a player who on that same season was somebody that is very revered within the community? That is somebody that people want to see come play again. That is somebody that everyone looks at and says, maybe they should have won. Go ahead in the comment section. Let me know some more examples that are like a Gabler Jesse dynamic, because I know that there are more out there. Okay, so this is an interesting one here. Bob Crowley, who a lot of people think is not a great winner. Who won the story of Gabon, though? Like, Sugar? Was that the biggest personality to come out of Gabon? I'm not totally sure. I mean, like, who else would you throw in there other than Sugar? Like a Ken? Those are the only two names that really jump to mind that I think you could say won the story. Like, yeah, I think you would go with Sugar, right? So, like, would you rather be a Sugar type player who goes out and wins the story of the season and is clearly the star of the season? Or would you rather be a Bob Crowley that no one's really talking about, no one's worried about once the next season starts? But hey, you won $1 million and you are the sole survivor, and no one can ever take that away from you. David and Adam in Millennials versus Gen X. I think that's a great shout. Like, yeah, David clearly had the most evolution over the course of that season. And Adam had a great story in Millennials versus Gen X. Obviously, out there fighting for his mom, is this huge, big Survivor super fan, goes out and wins the game. But, like, yeah, David is clearly the winner of the story in Millennials versus Gen X. Excuse me. Who would you rather be on that season? Would you rather be David or would you rather be Adam? Like, it's a fascinating question to ask. And we could run through these kinds of scenarios for, hours because there's just so many of those examples because of the nature of what Survivor is. That's the nature of the game, that you can have the best story. You can be the best player. You can have the most evolution. You can push the narrative forward more than anybody else on the show, and you can still lose. And so here we got Daryl Seymour, who will always showing love in the comment section. I'd rather win and not be highly regarded than be a loved character like Jesse. Well, is it? So I'll ask you this, and Daryl, you can respond in the comments. Is it because of just the money? Just okay, my life will change if I can have $600,000 in my bank account after taxes, or is it about hey, I won Survivor? Like, which one of those things is more important to you? Go ahead and respond in the comment section. The title, Daryl says, the title. So that's interesting because it's like, okay, like, yeah, you get the title of sole survivor, but and I get it, right? The title is forever. If there was a trophy, it could sit in your house forever. It would never ever leave until you got rid of it. But like the title is about legacy, isn't it? And would you want your legacy, even with the title, to be somebody that people don't really respect or people don't really hold in high regard? Or would you rather have the leg? Because, like, yeah, the title's forever. Legacy's also forever too. I mean, it's the old gladiator quote. Maximus, what we do in life echoes in eternity. Is that legacy as lasting as the title of sole survivor? Quinn saying, I feel like I'd rather win the story, get asked back, and then win the returnee player season. Best of both worlds. Yeah, that's the best case scenario, right? And I do think that's the best case scenario. Like, if Jesse were to go out and play again and win, then it's like, okay, you've maxed out Survivor, right? You went out, you left a great legacy, you won the story of a season, and then when you got called back, you went out and you won, and it's like, okay, your story is now complete. You've maxed out Survivor. You can come back and you can keep playing, and maybe you'll win again. But it's like it don't get much better than that. So I tell you what, unfortunately, we got to cut a little short. I have an obligation I have to get to around 8 o'clock. But this was very fun. And this is an episode I might return to at some point because I think there's so much meat left on the bones of this conversation, particularly when it comes to the production side of things of like how, if you win the story, very often it's not really in your control. It's just that you happen to have the run and the perception from production that decided to give you the winning story. But we can get into that in a different time. Thank you so much for everybody joining us for this episode of Gabe's Big Move. This is something I do want to talk about again, so don't worry. If you want to more about on this, we will return to it at some point. I promise you. Let's send some good energy and some love to all of our Survivor alumni who are coming back from Survivor 50 today. Awesome, awesome stuff. We'll talk to you next week.